In today's lesson, we're going to be discussing the chosen people of God, bringing up two names. We're going to enter this Bible study by the name of Jacob and Esau. Now, it was through Isaac that God had promised to raise up descendants to Abraham. Isaac's wife, Rebekah, had two sons, Esau and Jacob. Now, like Cain and Abel, these two sons were quite different. The Lord had said to Rebekah, "Two nations are in thy womb, and two manner of people shall be separated from thy bowels. And the one people shall be stronger than the other people, and the elder shall serve the younger." Genesis 25, verse 23. Esau, the elder son, was a cunning hunter, a man of the field, while Jacob was a man of the plains who dwelled inside of tents. Esau sells his birthright. Jacob, the younger of the two, was making stew one day when Esau came in from the field. Esau was hungry and said, "Feed me, I pray thee, with that same red pottage, for I am faint." Genesis 25, verse 30. Esau appears to have been a man who was more concerned with fleshly and physical things. He was guided by his five senses, and when he was hungry, satisfying his appetite was the most important thing in the world to him. Jacob, on the other hand, had an appreciation for spiritual things. Although he was by no means perfect, in response to Esau's request, Jacob demanded, "Sell me this day thy birthright." Genesis 25, verse 31. The birthright now, it was the privilege given to the oldest son. It gave him preferred treatment in the family, including first claim on the inheritance. Now, Esau was so oriented to the present rather than the future that he answered, "Behold, I am at the point to die. What is a profit? What profit shall this birthright do to me?" Genesis 25, verse 32. "Swear to me this day," Jacob insisted. And Esau sold his birthright to Jacob for bread and stew of lentils. And then Esau arose and went his way, having sold out a most valuable blessing for a temporary fleshly satisfaction. We see that in Genesis chapter 25, verse 33 through 34. How sad is it that when confronted with a choice of preparing for the future eternity or receiving a small measure of satisfaction right now, many will choose the present. Such people are looking at things that are seen and not the things that are eternal and unseen. 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 18. Jacob steals the blessing. The dramatic scene of Jacob gaining Esau's birthright was not their last encounter over family blessings. When Isaac was old and his vision dim so that he could not see, he called Esau, his favorite of the two boys, and asked Esau, "Go into the field with his bow and arrow for some venison." He requested this of Esau, and Isaac enjoyed the meat and wanted to eat some prior to bestowing upon Esau the blessing due to the firstborn. Now, Rebekah, the mother, heard Isaac's instructions to Esau, and she instructed Jacob, who was her favorite son, to bring her two kids of goats. She prepared the meat that Isaac liked and disguised Jacob by putting the goat skins on Jacob's hand and his neck and giving him Esau's clothing to wear. Then, pretending to be Esau, Jacob went in to his blind father and presented Isaac with the meat. Isaac was surprised that Esau had returned so soon with the meat, and he was a bit skeptical. He called Jacob near in order to touch him and said, the voice is Jacob's voice, but the hands and the hands I'm touching are the hands of Esau." Genesis 27, verse 22. But Isaac was unable to distinguish that it was Jacob, and he gave Jacob Esau's blessing. Shortly thereafter, just as Jacob had left his father, Esau came in. Isaac was very disturbed that he had been deceived. Esau cried with a bitter cry, but the blessing could not be reversed. Esau hated his brother Jacob and planned to kill him in revenge. When Rebekah heard of his plans, she urged Jacob to flee to Haran, where her brother Laban lived. Jacob's encounter with God. Genesis 28, verse 10 through 22. As Jacob traveled, he came to a place called Luz. or pronounced Luz, where he prepared to stay the night. While he slept, he dreamed of a ladder set up upon the earth with its top reaching to the heavens. The angels of God were going up and down the ladder. Above the ladder stood the Lord, who said, I am the Lord God of Abraham thy father, and the God of Isaac, the land whereon thou liest. To thee will I give it, and to thy seed, and thy seed shall be as the dust of the earth. And thou shalt spread abroad to the west, and to the east, and to the north, and to the south. And in thee and in thy seed shall all families of the earth be blessed. Genesis 28:13-14. Now Jacob awoke and said, Surely the Lord is in this place, and I knew it not. Being afraid, he continued, How dreadful is this place! This is none other but the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven. Genesis 28:16-17. Jacob remembers the house of the Lord. Early in the morning, Jacob rose and set up a pillar from the stones he had used for pillows. He poured oil on the pillar and called the name of that place Bethel, which means house of God. Jacob vowed, If God will be with me and will keep me in this way that I go, and will give me bread to eat and raiment to put on, so that I come again to my father's house in peace. Then shall the Lord be my God, and this stone which I have set for a pillar shall be God's house. And of all that thou shalt give me, I will surely give the tenth unto thee. Genesis 28:20-22. Thus God renewed with Jacob the covenant that had made with his father Isaac and his grandfather Abraham. Jacob wrestles with the angel of the Lord. Now, 20 years later, after Jacob had spent time with his uncle Laban and had begun his family, he was on his way back to see his aged father. He heard that Esau was coming to meet him, and fear rose up in his heart as he remembered his brother's pledge to kill him. Sending his family on, Jacob stayed behind. An angel of the Lord wrestled with him until the daybreak. When the angel saw that Jacob was not going to release him, he touched the hollow of Jacob's thigh, permanently shrinking the sinew and causing him to have a limp. Now the angel said, Let me go, for the day breaketh. And Jacob answered, I will not let thee go, except thou bless me. The angel asked, What is thy name? Jacob, he replied. Thy name shall be called no more Jacob, said the angel, but Israel. For as a prince hast thou power with God and with men, and hast prevailed. Genesis 32:24-28. Now because of his persistence, Jacob received the blessing that he desired and left the place a different man. His former name, Jacob, meant supplanter and had a connotation of trickery and deceitfulness. His new name, Israel, meant he who strives with God. There was also a physical difference. Every time he took a step, the limp reminded him of his encounter with the angel of the Lord and his brand new covenant. Certainly, when we come into the presence of God and determine to receive God's best, a miraculous change will take place in our lives. We will never be the same again. The chosen people. Bringing up the name of Joseph, many people are familiar. God reaffirmed his covenant with Jacob, who became Israel. And Jacob fathered 12 sons. Genesis 35:22-26. One of Jacob's sons, Joseph, was chosen by God to be a preserver of the family of Jacob. Genesis chapter 45, verse 5. Let's talk about Joseph's dream. Joseph was sensitive to the Lord and a person of high moral character. His brother became jealous of him when they saw that their father loved him above the other sons. Later, Joseph had some dreams that suggested that his brothers and mother and father would bow down to him. Genesis chapter 37, verse 3-11. And we see Joseph sold into slavery. Predictably, Joseph's brothers' hatred for him increased. One day when Jacob sent Joseph to check on his brothers, they saw an opportunity to rid themselves of him forever. After casting him into a pit, they sold him to some Midianite merchants for 20 pieces of silver. The Midianites took him into Egypt, where they sold him to Potiphar, who was one of Pharaoh's officers and a captain of the guard. You can find that in Genesis 37, verse 23 to 28. And we see here, Jacob is deceived. After having disposed of Joseph, his brothers took a goat and killed it, dipping Joseph's coat of many colors into the blood. They brought the coat to their father and asked, "Is this thy son's coat?" "It is my son's coat," Jacob declared. "An evil beast hath devoured him. Joseph is without doubt rent into pieces." And in his despair, Jacob refused to be comforted and mourned with tears for Joseph. Genesis 37, 29 to 36. Meanwhile, Joseph, being the conscientious, godly man that he was, did his very best as a servant to Potiphar. He had every reason of bitterness and an excuse to be sullen. Instead, he served his master diligently with a great character. And Potiphar saw that God was with him and that everything Joseph did, it prospered. Finally, Potiphar made Joseph an overseer of all that he had. Potiphar concerned himself only with the food that was set before him to eat, and Joseph took care of everything. Joseph's temptation. Now, Joseph's trials were not over. However, Potiphar's wife became infatuated with Joseph and daily tempted him to commit adultery with her. He steadfastly refused her advances until one day, as he fled from her presence, she grasped part of his clothing. Seeing that she was rejected by him, she contrived to accuse Joseph of trying to assault her, using his clothing as proof. Potiphar, his wrath kindled. He put Joseph into prison. A great sculptor once formed a beautiful statue representing the soul and its choice between good and evil. It was a child clutching a dove to its chest and being assailed by a serpent. This symbol fits everyone. The story of the temptation of the human spirit is never out of date. Now, Joseph is placed into prison. But even in prison, Joseph kept the right attitude. He refused to be bitter. He looked for opportunities to serve God. The keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners and the complete management of the prison altogether. Even in prison, God blessed Joseph and prepared the way for the fulfillment of his plan for him. In the prison were two men who had served Pharaoh, one as a chief butler and the other as a chief baker. Both chiefs, both had dreams, which Joseph was able to interpret. True to Joseph's interpretation, the butler was restored to his office, while the baker was hanged by his neck to death. Lesson 3, Chart 5. Joseph. Joseph, elevation under Pharaoh. At the end of 2 years, Pharaoh had a dream, and none of his men could interpret it. Then the butler remembered Joseph and suggested to Pharaoh that Joseph might be able to interpret Pharaoh's dream. Pharaoh called for Joseph, who told him significance of his dream that he had. Egypt would experience 7 years of plenty, followed by 7 years of famine. Now, Pharaoh promoted Joseph to the position of second most powerful ruler in all of Egypt and gave to this 30-year-old Hebrew the responsibility of storing up food during the 7 years of plenty in preparation for the drastic famine that was to come in Genesis 41, verse 46. Joseph experienced 2 periods of bondage in his life. The first when his brothers sold him into slavery, and the second when Potiphar's wife falsely accused him of attempted rape. Joseph did not let these circumstances define him. On the contrary, he worked even harder. He trusted God, and he was rewarded with the promotion for his good work. Each of us also, you and I, we've experienced some kind of bondage. Unlike Joseph, that bondage is rare, physical. More often, we are in bondage to our own lusts and to our own desires. However, we can live free from bondage if we are willing to just trust in the Lord and commit to all that is in his path for us. Joseph's brothers come to Egypt. When the famine came to Egypt, it also affected the land of Canaan, where Joseph's family still lived. When Jacob heard that Egypt had grain, he sent his sons, all except the youngest son, whose name is Benjamin, to buy some food. The person in charge of selling grain was Joseph. And just as he had dreamed many years previously, his brothers came before him, bowing down to the earth before him. Recognizing them, Joseph disguised himself and spoke roughly, trying to find out if his father was still alive, and attempting to devise a plan to bring his father back to Egypt. He accused his brothers of being spies. When they denied the charges and said that they were all sons of one man, Joseph took one of them, Simeon, and bound him until the others could return with their youngest brother Benjamin as proof of their innocence. Jacob was greatly troubled and refused to send Benjamin for fear that he too would never return. But when the famine grew worse, the family had no choice but to comply with Joseph's instructions. And Judah took personal responsibility for Benjamin, and the brothers traveled to Egypt once again. Now, this time, Joseph devised a plan to keep Benjamin, which involved secretly returning the brothers' money in the mouth of their sacks and putting his personal silver cup in the sack of Benjamin. When the brothers were stopped by Joseph's servant and returned to him, Joseph could no longer refrain, revealing to them exactly who he was. He wept aloud and said, "I am Joseph. Does my father yet live?" Joseph forgives his brothers. His brothers, troubled and surprised, could not answer. Then Joseph, who had every reason to be bitter, every reason to be harsh and unforgiving, said, "Now therefore be not grieved nor angry with yourselves that ye sold me hither, for God did send me before you to preserve life." Genesis 45, verse 45. Now, long before the New Testament was ever written, Joseph had learned one of the most valuable lessons that we could ever learn. And we know that all things work together for the good to them that love God, to them who are the called according to his purpose. Romans 8:28. As he was to say later, "Ye thought evil against me, but God meant it unto good, to bring to pass as it is this day, to save much people alive." Genesis chapter 50, verse 20. Jacob and his family settle in Goshen. Now, Joseph supplied his brothers with wagons and equipment. They returned to Canaan and brought their father Jacob back to Egypt to settle in the land of Goshen, the choice land of all Egypt. Here they enjoyed many years of blessing, peace, and plenty while Joseph was alive.